When people feel insecure, they play politics. When people play politics, you get poor performance, and that poor performance leads to insecurity, and around you go in this horrible, vicious cycle.
Welcome to The Thinking Leader, brought to you by Red Team Thinking. Bad leaders react, good leaders plan, and great leaders think. Each week, you'll get new ideas and insights from business executives, military experts, and innovative thought leaders to help you lead more effectively and better navigate your complex world. Now, here are your hosts, best-selling business author and top-rated leadership speaker, Bryce Hoffman, and former RAF Wing Commander and business agility coach, Marcus Dimbleby.
Hello and welcome to the show. It's just me today, but not really just me, because I am joined today with a wonderful thinker, Pete Dulcamara. Pete is the former chief scientist at Kimberly-Clark, where we first started working together. He's now on his own working to create businesses that improve people's lives from his base in Wisconsin. Pete is one of the most interesting thinkers I have ever encountered. You talk about a guy who's outside the box. We're going to have a great discussion today. Pete, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Bryce. I'm really looking forward to it.
So, Pete, I got to start by talking about your map. And you know, when we started working with Kimberly-Clark, it was right after the pandemic started. Yeah. It was back in spring of 2020. The very first workshop we did with you guys, you were on it, and the very first thing I saw was your map. And I said then, that is a red team thinking map if there ever was one. Can you unpack that map for people?
Yeah, Bryce. Yeah, I get this asked all the time. People always ask, why is your map upside down? And I always say, well, there is no upside down from outer space, right? And I got this map about 25 years ago, and it was all about questioning assumptions. So many times assumptions become quote unquote facts that actually rule the paradigm in which we literally see the world. And what I really love about this map is, you know, so many maps have the UK at the center at the top, right? And what's nice about this map is actually Africa is at the center at the top. And I think it talks about the importance of developing nations. I think it talks about the importance of diversity and inclusion. And I think Africa is going to be one of the most important continents over the next 100 years, probably the next 50 years. And so I love this perspective because, you know, it's the old notion of fish discovers water last. So many times we don't know the environment that we're swimming in until we're pulled out, gasping for breath, looking back saying, oh my God, is that the culture that I've been swimming in all this time? And it's not until you gain that awareness that you can actually make changes that are significant to an organization or to yourself or to your family or to your country. And so I think it's really important to always question assumptions because we're given quote unquote facts all the time. And I think we need to challenge those and make sure they're not just assumptions.
So true. And, you know, maps, as you say, are full of assumptions. And it's actually something I geek out on, you know, all the different types of, you know, there's a lot of other ways of drawing the Earth than the Mercator projection. And in fact, the Mercator projection skews the size of places like the United States, you know, ridiculously out of proportion to other parts of the world. You know, Greenland is not in reality, you know, this enormous, you know, landmass, you know, compared to Africa that it appears on Mercator projections.
Well, you know, my father passed away in 2009, but he was a lifetime military. You know, he retired as an officer in the military. I remember my dad always saying, when the terrain doesn't match the map, ignore the map.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, and that's true in business too. So many times we've got like a business plan, you know, but the competitive environment is different from what we assumed in our plan. And we've got to pivot. We got to change. We got to actually, you know, make sure that we address what's really going on, not what our assumptions were on a piece of paper.
Well, and you're so right. And, you know, this is why one of the key aims of what we try to do is talk about driving decision-making as close to the coalface as possible, driving decision-making as close to the front line as possible, driving decision-making as close to the factory floor as possible or the retail cash register as possible, because it's the people on the ground at the front, at the pointy end of the spear that understand better than the people at the top of the house what's going on, what things really look like. There's a great quote from Eisenhower, and I'm going to paraphrase it because the exact wording I may be slightly off on, but which is that, he said, farming looks easy if you do it from a desk and your plow is a pencil.
Yeah. No, exactly. But, I think you're hitting on something really important, which is the power of the individual, and it's interesting, if you go back kind of before the internet, right? And most of our businesses, most of our institutions were all designed before the internet, before the World Wide Web. And I think before the internet, Sir Francis Bacon was right. Knowledge is power. And so many of our organizations are structured around this power and controlling knowledge in an organization. And post-internet, really Albert Einstein is right, which is imagination is more powerful or more important than knowledge. And I think that's where we are in organizations today, is how do we unleash that imagination? Because I'm always intrigued how all of us go through our lives, raising children, paying our bills on time, volunteering in the community, and somehow when we walk through the doors of a company, we're brain dead and need a supervisor. I'm always like, people don't need supervision. What they need is leadership. They need to be provided clarity and specificity as to where we're going. One of my favorite quotes is by General Omar Bradley, who said, we need to navigate by the stars, not by the light of every passing ship. And so many times,
I love that quote.
I love that quote. And competitors are just passing ships. Yeah, we got to be cognizant of where they are, right. But can we put the stars in the sky? So even if you have 100,000 employees around the world, everybody can see those stars in the sky and can navigate based on the vision of the company versus all the little shiny objects that come our way on a daily basis. And I think that's the role of leadership, is to put the stars in the sky so that we all can navigate where we're going together.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, Pete, that is, that's the definition of being a thinking leader, is providing that clarity and getting out of the way to allow for that capability to occur. And it's so important, and it's something that is rare, though. One of the things that I was so impressed when we started working with Kimberly-Clark, and I don't want to get into any confidential stuff here, but was just that to find out that there was a you there, that there was someone whose job was to think crazy ideas about how very simple consumer products could become something a lot more than just that.
Yeah.
And some of the ideas I heard from you were just mind blowing. And I was like, that makes me happy to know that there's someone whose job it is to think about things like this. And it's rare, though.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to, and it's not just, I think all of us need to be unleashed. I can sum up my whole leadership principle in one equation. And that equation is performance is equal to potential minus obstacles plus encouragement. And let me unpack that a little bit, right? So
yes,
I really believe people's potential far exceeds our ability to even comprehend it. But what holds them back are obstacles. And our job as leaders is to identify those obstacles. They don't understand the strategy. They don't have the training. And it can't be excuses. I'm not talking about victimitis. I'm talking about real obstacles that keep people from living to their full potential. And sometimes the biggest obstacle in a person's mind. And so you need encouragement. They need to be told, you can do it. I believe in you. I trust you. Go make it happen. And so many times in organizations, managers focus on measuring a person's performance and predicting their potential. And so many of our systems are around performance and potential. But I think leaders spend all their time trying to understand what are all the obstacles that are keeping you from living to your full potential, and what targeted encouragement can I give this individual so that they can live to their full potential and their performance will exceed anything we can even comprehend. And I think that's the real job of leadership, is remove obstacles, provide encouragement, and help people live to their full potential. And I think if we do that in organizations through servant leadership, I think we'll be blown away at the outcomes that are achieved by just ordinary people.
Amen. Preach on, brother. Seriously. I mean, that is the gospel we preach at Red Team Thinking and on this podcast, because, you know, this is what I saw from my mentor, Alan Mullally. And you and I have talked about this before. You know, the thing that I learned from him was the job of the leader is not to be the person with the answers. It's to be the person who clears a way for the people who have the answers to execute, to move forward, to do those things. And, you know, when he came in to Ford from Boeing, almost every lever he pulled was a lever that somebody in Ford had already identified, had already said, we should pull this lever, but they either couldn't reach it, or the company's caustic corporate culture was was keeping them from being able to pull it. And his job was say, you mean this lever here? Yeah, let's pull that.
That is key. That is key. There is so much latent capability in organizations. You know, I sometimes think that the United States is the most underdeveloped nation in the world when you look at our potential. You think about the potential and how many individuals in the United States are not living to their full potential. And then broaden that around the world. How many of our 8 billion people are not living to their full potential? I bet it's 8 billion. You know, and so, you know, how do we remove obstacles, provide encouragement, provide clarity and specificity to a vision that we all can buy into, you know, and that's when extraordinary things happen at a family level, a company level, a country level, a world level.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because literally just this morning I was reading a story about this Ethiopian-born kid in Virginia who invented at 14 a soap that helps cure skin cancer.
Wow.
And a young Ethiopian immigrant living with his parents in Virginia just won one of the top teen science awards for developing a soap that stimulates cells to respond and combat skin cancer at 14.
Yeah.
And that speaks exactly to this untapped potential you're talking about. And you know, you're right about the world, but I want to stick with the U.S. for a second here, because what you were just saying made me think of something really interesting. Several years ago, I heard it was probably 10 or 12 years ago, I heard a really interesting interview with Melinda Gates. And it was actually a really sad interview in a certain sense, because she was on the Diane Rehm show on NPR, and, you know, which is a call-in show. And one person after another was angrily calling in and saying, why do you spend all your money in Africa and you know, in India, and, you know, not help the people in the United States? And just very calmly and on point, Melinda kept repeating the same point. She said, you know, Bill and I have studied this situation carefully. And she said, we invest in one thing in the United States, which is education. The thing that holds people back in America is unequal access to education. She said, you know, this is not the case in Africa. In Africa, there are people who are well educated who don't have access to clean water, who don't have access to healthcare, who die of treatable diseases. And so in those countries, we are focusing on things like this because that's what holds people back. But the reason why people go hungry in the United States, she said, is not because there's not enough food in the United States. The reason why people die early of treatable diseases in the United States is not because there's not enough medicine in the United States. The reason, she said, we have studied this for years, and the reason that every bad thing that exists in the United States socially exists is because of lack of education. If people had equal access to education, you wouldn't have, you know, people going hungry in Appalachia. If people had access to good education, you wouldn't have, you know, high rates of preventable childhood disease in urban, you know, ghetto areas and stuff like this. The problem in the United States is that we have a broken education system. And so she said, we do invest in the United States, but we only invest in education because if you solve that, you solve all these other problems in the U.S. And I think that goes to what you're talking
Absolutely. About. You know, one of the most powerful presentations I ever saw was by Joseph Coates, who was, there was a think tank called Coates and Jarrett. And Joseph Coates presented this presentation one time on achieving the American dream. And it was all these waves of immigrants, Italians, Irish, German, that came into the United States, and looking at how long it took them to achieve the American dream, which was defined as their kids went to college, they own a house, they own a car, they can save some money, those kind of parameters. Yeah. And it was roughly 30 years. So then he looked at African Americans. And of course, African Americans had been here for 300 years, but they were enslaved all that time. And even after the Civil War, with Jim Crow and everything else, he was looking at, how long does it take for an African American in the United States to achieve the American dream? And this was roughly like 1980s is what he was looking at, that African Americans began to own houses, own cars, their children started to go into college. And so then he back titrated to see what would be the date of embarkation for African Americans, and it aligned with Brown versus the Board of Education. And to your exact point, it's not till you have access to education can you achieve the American dream. And so I commend Melinda Gates, because I think that's what we need to focus on in the United States is education. One of the things that I worked on during the pandemic and with an individual named Jason Fields. I just love Jason. So Jason is the CEO of MadRep, the Economic Development Board of Madison, Wisconsin. And prior to that, he was the state representative for District 11 in Milwaukee. And him and I got to know each other, and we started this idea was, hey, rather than importing products from China, what if we could import solutions from our inner cities? What if we focused on Black entrepreneurship and how do we foster Black entrepreneurship? And so Jason and I, we wrote some papers, we worked on this. And there's an individual, Craig Dickman, who's the managing director for Titletown Tech, which is a joint venture between the Green Bay Packers and Microsoft. And so we presented this to Craig Dickman, and we had this idea. We were like, wouldn't it be cool if the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball could get behind this idea of fostering Black entrepreneurship in Baltimore and St. Louis and all of our major cities? And it was this idea of how do we close the racial wealth gap in America? Not by bringing whites down, but by bringing Blacks up. And if we could do that, it would add almost $5 trillion to the U.S. economy by closing the racial wealth gap in America. And Craig Dickman went on and presented this to Mark Murphy, who's the managing director of NFL. So my part was really small. I got to give Craig Dickman the credit. And Mark presented this to the NFL, and there's something today called equity leagues. And that's exactly what equity leagues is focused on, is fostering entrepreneurship in our urban cities to educate people who live in the inner cities on how to create businesses, how to start businesses, and how to create value so that we can close the racial wealth gap in America. And it does. It all starts with education.
And that goes right to your point about the untapped talent. That's the thing. It's, it's sad that in this day and age, this is so easily solvable. You look at things like the Khan Academy. The Khan Academy has made great education, great learning open to anybody who wants to take it, but you still need leadership. You still need, it's hard for a kid to self-direct themselves through the Khan Academy, that you still need a teacher to even leverage that, and stuff. And so it's still, I know I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's incomprehensible to me that we live in a country in which we pay teachers less than we pay prison guards.
Yeah. Well, Bryce, what's amazing to me is in less than a decade, we went from the Earth to the moon. Right. And also, right. And it's that scene in Apollo 13 where Tom Hanks is covering up the moon, and he says, we didn't have to go. We decided to go. We just decided to go, and we went, right? And so if we could go from the Earth to the moon in less than a decade, why can't we achieve racial equality, racial justice, gender equality within the next decade? We don't need a Saturn V rocket to do it, right? All it is our mindset. If you want to change the world, all you have to do is change your mind. And sometimes that's the biggest change of all. is to change our mindset. But that's what we're challenged to do. Viktor Frankl, said that, when you're faced with a situation that you can't change, the only option you have left is to change yourself. And that's where.
Well, look at Mark Benioff as a perfect example of this. That he was part of this initiative to promote workplace equality, gender equality in the workplace that he started in San Francisco. And in the middle of the first meeting, he said, "You know what? I wonder if we have a pay gap at Salesforce." And he asked his head of HR, can you run a report and find out, do we have a pay gap at Salesforce between men and women? The next day, his head of HR put a report on his desk that said, "Yeah, we do. We do too." And you know what his response was? "Great, let's close it."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, he just made the decision. There was no focus group. There was no study group. He just said, "Close the pay gap."
Yeah, because if the results came in and your profits were less than target, you wouldn't put together a team and ask employees and everything else. You would close the gap, right? And that's what we've got to do here as well. I don't know if you know this, but the gender gap today, if I'm not incorrect, is 150 years. The estimate by the World Economic Development Board, I think. Forum. But they look at three vectors. There's the educational gap, the political gap, and the economic gap. And today globally, that's it was 150 years before the pandemic. I think it actually widened during the pandemic. And to me, that's just totally unacceptable. I mean, I commend the leader that you just referenced to actually take action versus, hey, well, let's talk about it again. Let's study it again,
But that's the thing. So I'm going to say something that it saddens me to say, but it's something I've thought a lot about, and I think it's true. You talked about, going from the Earth to the Moon in a decade because we decided to. I would submit that we decided as a country to stop doing stuff like that, just as intentionally as we decided to do it. I will tell you, I thought it was a really sad day when the last space shuttle was driven through the streets of LA to a museum. I actually teared up because the day that happened, there was a story that I read, and I don't remember where it was. It was New York Times, Wall Street Journal, something like this, by a scientist. It was an op-ed. And it said, America is slowing down. And it talked about we now lack the ability to travel as fast and as far as we did 40 years ago. Yeah. We don't have, and I know we do right now, but at the time he said, we don't have anything like the Saturn V rocket anymore. We don't, it actually takes jets longer to cross the US today than it did 30 years ago, and I know there's reasons for this and fuel savings and stuff like this, but somehow in the I don't know whether it was the 1990s or the 2000s, we decided as a country that stuff was just too hard for us, that solving our problems was too hard. We threw up our hands and we stopped doing hard things. And if you think about Kennedy's speech that kicked off the race to get to the moon, what did he say? He said, "We choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." And somehow we made a different choice in the past 20 or 30 years to stop doing things that were hard. I don't know why, but it's sad.
Well, I think as a nation, we have to reinvigorate the endless frontier of Vanderveer Bush. You go back to Vanderveer Bush and, bringing government, industry, academia, citizenry together to achieve extraordinary things. And I think what we've lost, Bryce, is a goal. We don't have a goal as a nation. And if you go back to the week before the D-Day invasion of Europe, you got, soldiers in bars, the British are, fighting the Americans and they're, it's, a little bit of chaos going on. But as soon as the D-Day invasion happened, everybody was there was a clear mission. There was a clear goal. There was a clear objective. There was a clear timeline. And we're just missing that as a nation. And, I think that's why we're in this, I call it this political soap opera that we're in, the Reds versus the Blues and, all the nonsense that's going on. It's because we lack clarity and specificity of vision. I'll tell you, I'll bring this back to my own experience. So as an R&D vice president, and I was an R&D executive at Dow Chemical, I was an R&D executive at Kimberly-Clark, and every time I would take a new job, here's the dynamic that I would see. I would go ask the business people, are you happy with what you're getting out of R&D? And they would always say, no, we're not really happy with what we're getting. We want so much more out of R&D than we're getting. I'd go talk to the R&D people, and the R&D people would say, we don't feel understood or appreciated, right? And what I noticed was there was lack of clarity and specificity of strategy and vision. And what happens in an environment like that is people feel insecure. When people feel insecure, they play politics. When people play politics, you get poor performance. And that poor performance leads to insecurity. And around you go in this horrible, vicious cycle. And the only way I've ever been able to find a way to break that cycle is first by creating clarity and specificity of vision and objective and goal. That's one. Two is to build trust through partnership. The third thing you got to do is you got to create greater value by focusing on the portfolio that you're working on. But the most important thing is you got to bring joy to work by focusing on people. So every organization I've ever gone into, that's my mantra: partnership, portfolio, people. If you focus on building partnership by building trust, you focus on portfolio to create greater value, and you focus on developing people to create joy in work, you can achieve extraordinary things. And that's what we need at a national level as well.
Amen again. Amen. Let's take a break here. Folks, just let that sink in for a minute here. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation and talk about human-centric innovation. Stay tuned. Hey, folks. Bryce here. If you're listening to this and you're liking what you're hearing and you're wondering, am I a red team thinker? We have an easy way for you to find out. Just go to the show notes, click on the link there to our free assessment to find out if you are a red team thinker and what you can do to think more effectively, to lead more effectively, and to make better decisions faster in your complex world. Like I said, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply go to our website, redteamthinking.com. Check it out. I can't wait to see how you score. Welcome back. So, Pete, before the break, we were having a really great conversation, and it all comes down to unleashing this human potential that exists everywhere, and so much of it is untapped. You are working on something that is really interesting to me. Humanity-centric innovation, not human-centric innovation. I misspoke before the break, but humanity-centric innovation. What is humanity-centric innovation?
Yeah, so humanity-centric innovation is this idea of solving the world's biggest problems in an economically viable way. So I have this crazy notion that we all can become billionaires. If we stop defining a billionaire as somebody who accumulates $1 billion and start defining it as somebody who helps 1 billion people. And I think the way we can help 1 billion people is through humanity-centric innovation. So what is that? I think you're familiar with consumer-centric innovation. Consumer-centric innovation happens at the creative collision of what's needed by the consumer, what's required by the business, and what's possible through science and technology. And if you have those three things, you have an innovation. If you're missing any one, you don't, right? You can start with the technology, but you have to have a business model. You have to have a consumer need. You have those three things. Creative collision leads to an innovation. Well, humanity-centric innovation happens at the creative collision of what are the needs of humanity. And these are defined really well in the UN SDGs, climate action, ending poverty, gender equality, coupled with what are the business models of the 21st century, business models like the free data economy of Google and Facebook, or the crowd economy of Airbnb and Uber. So, what are those business models? And then the third piece is what are the exponential technologies of the 21st century? Artificial intelligence, advanced robotics, blockchain, genomics. And the idea is, again, the creative collision of what are the greatest needs in humanity that can be solved with these 21st century business models powered by exponential technologies. And that's what humanity-centric innovation is all about. Because, I believe charities are important, but they're not scalable. Businesses are.
Right.
And so we need to create businesses with purpose, businesses that are focused on the world's biggest problems and solving those problems in an economically viable way.
I love this concept. And I again, I couldn't agree with you more. This goes very much to my own personal life journey. I as many of our listeners know, I used to be a journalist. I didn't start out as a business journalist, though. I started out as a political reporter, and I was going to be a crusading journalist, shining a light on the injustices of the world, and blah blah blah. And I say blah 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 because after covering government for, gosh, I guess it was about 4 years at increasingly large levels, starting with covering the city council in a small town, one of the smallest cities in California, Point Arena, California, population 500. And then, ending up covering, state politics, in the Bay Area in that space of time. I just saw at every level the dysfunction and the inability to do hard things and the inability to address problems in a rapid or even meaningful way in a lot of cases. And I just saw how bogged down things became. And at the same time, this was the late 1990s. I saw what was happening in Silicon Valley and how problems were being solved overnight. And I was fortunate at the time. I was working for a chain of newspapers in the Bay Area that our flagship was the Oakland Tribune. And I was fortunate that we reporters got to go and take a class every year at UC Berkeley in journalism to continue our education. And one year I decided to take a course from the business editor of the San Jose Mercury News. And at this point, San Jose was ground zero of the tech boom. And the first day of class, walked into the classroom, and this editor stood up in front of the class, and he said, first words out of his mouth, he said, business journalists are going to be the war correspondents of the 21st century. And he said, governments move too slow. Politics moves too slow. Business is what is changing the world around us today. Business is what is going to decide solutions or create problems. Business is what is where the narrative of human history is now centered. And he went on to unpack in very powerful ways all of the ways that businesses were tackling issues that governments had struggled with for decades, ways that businesses were creating problems that the governments were unable to stop. And he said, if you want to have a front seat to history now, you need to be a business reporter. And fortunately, I had just won a whole bunch of awards for my paper on a piece I'd done. And I had written one of the first, this was like in 1998 era, in 1999, I'd written one of the first big series on the Y2K problem and how complex it was and stuff. And so I walked into the publisher's office and I said, I want to cash in my chips for everything, all the laurels that just landed on the paper because of my work. And her response was, how much do you want? And I said, I don't want a raise. I want a new assignment. I want to be a business reporter. I want to cover Silicon Valley. She looked at me and she said, you're a political reporter. And I said, well, I just wrote a piece about a technology problem and this is what I want to do. Got a lot of offers from your competitors. If you want to keep me, this is the price. And that's how I became a business reporter. And it's because I saw exactly what you're just talking about, Pete, that while it's far from guaranteed, if real rapid change was going to happen, it was going to come from business, not from government. And I still believe that.
Well, and I think that is a business imperative in today's world is to focus on purpose and to focus on creating a more sustainable world. And quite frankly, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, they want to work for a company that is focused on purpose. And has some, so it's a balance of profit, purpose, and prosperity for all. That's what we need to focus on. And Bryce, I think there's an interesting dynamic that's happening. I don't know if I'm right or not, but I almost think that in the 20th century, institutions hired individuals to achieve the purpose of the institution. And I think we're starting to see a shift. I think in the future, individuals are going to hire institutions to achieve their own purpose in life. And I think that is an incredible dynamic, because the whole time I worked for Dow Chemical, the whole time I worked for Kimberly-Clark, I never thought of myself as an employee. And it's not that I'm a megalomaniac, but I woke up every day with this purpose to help create businesses that improve people's lives. And I knew I didn't have the financial or technical wherewithal to pull it off, but these corporations did. And so I always asked myself, how do I use this institution to achieve my own personal vision? And I was lucky that I worked for a company like KC, better care for a better world is what that's what they're all about, right? And so by achieving my mission, I was achieving their mission. And the one thing that I found in life is that, there's these two, there's your purpose and there's the company's purpose or the organization's purpose that you're a part of, whether it's, business journalism or what have you, is that if there is an overlap between the two, that creates stress and tension in your life. And you got to find that place where there's an overlap between your purpose and the organization's purpose so that you can really achieve your passion in life. And I think that's a calling for business today, is to create that clarity of purpose for individuals. Otherwise, they're not going to get the best people to work for them.
That's why I left journalism. That's why I left newspapers. You just nailed it on the head. Because when I started as a journalist, there was a mission that I believed in about providing clarity, about telling the truth, about asking the hard questions. But over the course of my career in journalism, which started in the early 90s and ended in 2013, the mission evolved in newspapers too. Who could post something fastest on Twitter? Who could get the story up 5 seconds before the competition did, whether it was right or wrong. And it became about eyeballs, not about truth. It became about clickbait rather than facts. And that's not what I signed up for. So fortunately I had options because of the work that I'd done to be able to say, you know what, this is not the mission that I signed up for. I'm done. And to walk away from it. But I think a lot of people, I think that's why, Pete, you see so much talk about quiet quitting and all of this stuff, is because I think that people are not willing, as you said, my grandfather, went to work for Southern Pacific Railroad, when he was 18, and he retired, from Southern Pacific Railroad, when he turned 60 or 65. I don't remember what the railroads had a weird retirement age. And, those days are gone, and it's a world right now where people are either going to go and do their side hustle and do something that's more meaningful to them, or they're going to sit and surf the internet all day instead of doing their job because it's a job that doesn't bring them fulfillment, that doesn't meet their mission. And the companies that are going to be successful, the companies that are going to just be rocket ships, are the ones that have that clarity of purpose, that provide that value to their employees, not just value to their customers, but value to their employees.
There's a boy
and help them.
There's a book I love. Yeah. It's called The 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. Have you ever heard of this book?
Yeah. No. What are the 3 signs of a miserable job?
The 3 signs of a miserable job is if you're working on something that's irrelevant, immeasurable, and invisible. Right. So if you're in a company, right, even if you're working on the biggest project in the whole company, if you can't measure whether you're winning or losing, that's a miserable existence. But even if you're working on the biggest project in the company, you can measure whether you're being successful. If you get no credit when it's all over, you're completely invisible. That's a miserable existence as well. And so I think to create joy in work, you just do the opposite. You give people a goal worthy of their effort. You help them measure that in terms that important to the business or the customer or the client. And then everybody gets credit at the end. It's like a movie, at the end of a movie, I don't even know what a key grip does, but he or she is up on the screen, right? And so how do we do that in organizations to give everybody the credit they deserve, measure the impact that they're having, and making sure people are working on things that are really relevant to the organization. And you can create.
What did Napoleon say? I could conquer the world if I had enough revenue.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. Well, we all want, sincere recognition. I think is really key. But Bryce, it's interesting. Your story parallels mine a little bit. I graduated from Oklahoma State University with a master's degree in chemical engineering, and I took a job with the Dow Chemical Company. So I've been blessed to work for Dow and Kimberly-Clark, both two really great companies. And I remember driving down to the Gulf Coast after college to start my job. And there's this bridge you go over, and literally on the Gulf Coast, there are just miles and miles of pipe and distillation columns and heat exchangers. And as young chemical engineer, I remember going over that bridge thinking to myself, oh my God, this is beautiful. Look at all these pipes and distillation columns and heat exchangers. I was so excited. And about a decade later, two things happened. One is I had the opportunity to go to the Prince Charles Business and the Environment. This was through Cambridge University to learn about business and sustainability. I actually got to meet Prince Charles twice, but those are two different stories. I can tell you.
That's awesome.
Tell you sometime.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah. I even get Christmas cards from Prince Charles. They're kind of interesting. They're like these painted things, that his hand painted.
King Charles. King Charles.
Yeah, he was just Prince Charles then. He just signs it Charles. But anyway, I
love that. That's amazing.
I digress.
So cool.
I digress. So anyway.
No. That's cool. But go ahead.
So anyway.
Yeah. I'm so happy you're telling this story, by the way, because I know this story.
So, two really events. One was the Prince Charles Business and the Environment. But the other thing that happened was in 1997, actually Christmas Day 1997, we learned that my wife was pregnant with our first child, Rachel. She's right there. So the business and the environment, and I learned that I was having a child. And over that Christmas break, I took some time to ask myself, what had I really accomplished in life? What did I want to accomplish in life? And what do I want my legacy to be? And I wrote down this mission statement, which is to help raise children that live a life fulfilled and help create businesses that improve people's lives. And every major decision that I've made since 1997 has to help me raise children that live a life fulfilled or help create businesses that improve people's lives. And when I went over that same bridge again, I remember looking out and thinking to myself, what a rape of the earth. Can't we do better as human beings? Every single day, look out your window. Every single day, nature is taking CO2, water, and sunlight and making complex carbohydrates. How do we move from hydrocarbons based on petroleum to carbohydrates based on microbes and plants? I mean, that was what went through my head right there at that moment was there's got to be a better way. And that's what humanity-centric innovation is really all about, is solving our biggest problems using the power of nature. She's been at it for 3.5 billion years on this planet. I think we have something to learn from her, right? And so,
I love that.
And so that guiding vision of creating business that improve people's lives, quite frankly, it's the reason I left Dow Chemical to come to Kimberly-Clark. It's the reason I left management to become chief scientist. It's the reason I left Kimberly-Clark to start my own company focused on this idea of creating businesses that improve people's lives. I'm really passionate about this idea, and I really believe there's a real opportunity for us to solve the world's biggest problems in an economically viable way through exponential technologies, business models of the 21st century, focused on the biggest problems facing humanity. And
I love it. And I love that we've come full circle too, Pete, from where we started with the map, because it's all about perspective, right? How you viewed those miles of pipe and condensing towers and heat exchangers as a fresh out of grad school chemist versus how you viewed them after coming back from hanging with Prince Charles and talking about how to save the earth.
yeah.
Looked very different. It's just like you turned the map upside down.
Absolutely. Yeah. And turning the map upside down is critical for all of us. I think,
exactly.
Yeah, no, perfect, Bryce.
That's exactly what I wanted to say is folks, you got to turn your map upside down. It's for all of us, changing our perspective, looking at things differently and asking tough questions is the way to move forward, is the way to show us the door that we didn't even know was there. And then to have the courage to walk through it. Pete, this has been an amazing discussion. We've got to have you back on the show. I know we've just scratched the surface. You've given me so much to think about. You've given our listeners, our viewers so much to think about. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bryce. And just remember, if you want to change the world, all you have to do is change your mind.